Celebrating their first anniversary, a young couple entered the Vermont mountains for a camping trip. 3 days later, only one would make it back alive, setting off a desperate search for a missing person and the discovery of something so shocking it seems nearly unexplainable. Join us as we look into the horrific story of Emily and Joseph Ferlazzo. Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the family and friends of Emily Ferlazzo, a young woman and nurse lost far too soon. It was Friday, October the 15th, when 43-year-old Joseph Ferlazzo and his 22-year-old wife Emily and their family dog Remington piled into their converted camper and headed out for an anniversary getaway. The pandemic was starting to fade, and the couple had spent most of the prior year living in the camper on her mother's property in Northfield, New Hampshire. It seemed like a good time to get out and enjoy themselves, and they'd be meeting up with Joseph's sister and boyfriend the next day. It was also a chance for them to get back to Vermont, the state they had left the previous year after the pandemic had made living together tough for the two. Joseph had been a licensed tattoo artist and body piercer, one of the many career choices that was hit hard by the changes brought about by the quarantine. Emily worked as a nurse, and while her husband's work faded away, hers had become one of the most vital frontline jobs, but one that carried some of the highest risks and burnout rates in the country. The two eventually left Vermont for an inexpensive place to stay and to ride out the storm until better days came back. The trip from Northfield, New Hampshire to Bolton, Vermont takes about 2.5 hours, winding through some breathtaking scenery. The leaf-looking season for Vermont is in the middle of October, drawing visitors from all over the lake region and the country to take a look at the beautiful splashes of color. The couple would be staying at a campsite just off of Vermont Route number 2 and the Bolton Valley Access Road. Nearby, there would be the Bolton Potholes, an area known for gorgeous cascades, waterfalls, and swimming holes. It was truly an autumn paradise, with temperatures comfortable in the 70s and clear skies. And then, the next morning, Joseph walked into Maxie's restaurant in nearby Waterbury Village to have breakfast with his sister and her boyfriend. Emily was not with him. An excuse must have been made for her absence. The trio had their meals and then parted ways. What probably just dawned on you didn't register with the people Joseph was dining with. Emily was not there. Whatever the excuse he gave was, it could not have been true. She couldn't have stayed back at the hotel because they weren't staying at one. Instead, they were staying in their camper. She couldn't have gone out for a drive on her own because Joseph had their only vehicle. Emily just was not there. On Monday, October the 18th, Joseph would call Emily's parents and let them know that he and she had had an argument. Just outside of Bolton, he said, the two had argued. He stopped the camper and she had gotten out and walked away down Vermont Route number 2, saying that she would call for an Uber to take her back to New Hampshire. Joseph said that he then drove back down the road to a convenience store, stopped there for a while, then he drove back hoping to pick her up. She was nowhere to be found, and he assumed that she had been able to get a ride. She was last seen, according to Joseph, wearing a black long-sleeved shirt, ripped jeans, and white sneakers. Emily's parents told him that she had never arrived. The family immediately called the police and reported her as missing. They knew the couple had a rocky relationship and that there had been some incidences where they saw bruises and scratches on their daughter. They had suspected there had been at least a few cases of domestic violence between the two of them. Perhaps the two were just incompatible. Perhaps it was the stress of the times with little income, or maybe even the cramped quarters of the two of them living in a tiny converted camper. The police had never gotten involved before, but now those incidents made the parents very suspicious of Joseph's story. The police would agree, and they needed to talk to Joseph. They couldn't reach him, though, as he never brought the camper back home to her parents' property. Joseph didn't come home. Instead, he headed down to the town of St. Albans, Vermont, about 60 miles away from their campsite in Bolton. He headed to a friend's home and stopped for a visit. That friend let him park the camper outside of his house on Meadowbrook Lane, not having any idea that Joseph was apparently keeping a horrible secret. That night, Joseph would stay in the camper. He wasn't sleeping, though. What he was actually doing was a gruesome end to his marriage with Emily. The next morning, Joseph would head to a nearby Maple Fields convenience store as if nothing had happened at all. Throughout the night, police both in New Hampshire and Vermont had been on the lookout for young, blonde-haired Emily, but to no avail. Joseph, with dark curly hair, numerous tattoos, and a nose piercing, had been spotted several times here and there. In particular, after seeing the missing persons report on the television news, one of the servers at Maxie's restaurant called in to say that he had eaten there on Saturday morning, but that Emily was not with him.
Vermont State Police are looking for a New Hampshire woman who disappeared from the town of Bolton. Officials say 22-year-old Emily Ferlazzo from Northfield was last seen Saturday afternoon. They say she and her husband were staying in an Airbnb. They say the couple had an argument and Ferlazzo went for a walk. Her husband says he went to the store and when he came back, he couldn't find her. Ferlazzo was last seen wearing a long-sleeved black shirt, ripped jeans, and white sneakers. She also has a sleeve tattoo on her left arm and a snake tattoo from her chest to her torso. If you have any information, you're asked to call Vermont State Police.
A friend of Joseph's in St. Albans had also called to say that he had run into the man on Monday evening, but that he did not know where Joseph had gone afterwards. The next morning, Vermont State Police Detective Sergeant Amy Nolan happened to walk into the same Maple Fields convenience store that Joseph had. It took a moment for her to make sure that he was the man they were looking for, and then she approached him. The situation certainly could have gone badly, but Sergeant Nolan calmly let Joseph know that he was wanted for questioning in the disappearance of Emily Ferlazzo. Joseph, knowing what had actually happened and perhaps resigned to whatever fate would bring next, surrendered to Sergeant Nolan and was taken back to the State Patrol barracks in St. Albans. Once in custody, Joseph began telling everything.
We start with breaking news tonight. A woman reported missing has been found dead, and her husband tells state police that he did it.
NBC5's Carolyn Sistran joins us live from the St. Albans police barracks. Carolyn, what are police saying?
Well, Brian, Alice, Joseph Ferlazzo was recognized at a Maple Fields convenience store earlier today by a state police detective, and that detective bringing him here to the St. Albans barracks just minutes away from that store, where he eventually confessed to killing his 22-year-old wife.
The information he provided was that he had killed his wife, Emily. He said that he had done so in the town of Bolton in the early Saturday morning hours.
Well, her body will be brought to the chief medical examiner's office in Burlington for an autopsy tomorrow to determine the cause and manner of death and to confirm her identity. And Joseph Ferlazzo is still here in St. Albans, and police say that he is expected to be charged with first-degree murder by the end of the night, and his arraignment will be tomorrow in Burlington. We're live in St. Albans tonight. Carolyn Sistran, NBC5 News.
The camper van would turn out to be the grisly scene of a murder and a frantic attempt to dispose of her body. There were still many questions to be asked, but there was no doubt as to what had happened. Now it would just be a matter of untangling the evidence in light of what Joseph had said and would admit to. Forensic teams would work around the clock, piecing together not just how the murder had happened in the camper van, but the lives of the couple who had been living within it. Meanwhile, Joseph would lay out his version of what had happened. In his story, Joseph would tell police investigators that he and Emily had gotten into a heated argument on the way to Bolton. Pulling over, the argument became a fight, and it came to blows, with her kicking him in the groin. The pair calmed down and got back into the camper and continued on their journey. That evening, according to the account Joseph gave to the police, Emily went to lay down and was asleep in just a matter of minutes. Joseph then said that he took a pistol and shot her twice in the back of the head while she was sleeping, killing her almost instantly. The Vermont State Medical Examiner's autopsy would confirm that portion of his story, that a nearly point-blank gunshot had been the cause of Emily's death. Joseph then told investigators that he had put a black plastic trash bag over Emily's head and dragged her body from the bed and stuffed her into the cramped bathroom of the camper. There she would remain while he had breakfast with his sister, and there she would continue to remain the next day and the following day too as he drove to St. Albans. After he secured permission to stay in the camper at his friend's place in St. Albans, Joseph had spent the night dismembering Emily's body. Using a handsaw, Joseph removed her hands, feet, arms, and legs, putting each of the parts in separate trash bags. When the camper was brought to the St. Albans Police Barracks lot, forensic teams entered the vehicle. All of the parts of Emily's body were found within the camper, along with the alleged weapon, a Glock 19 semi-automatic pistol. Other weapons, ammunition, and a sizable amount of cash were also found. There was no sign of Remington the dog. Whether he told the police what his plans were for Emily's body after that point has not been released to the public at the time of this video. Joseph, in a protective mask and face shield, would appear on closed-circuit television the next day for his arraignment in court. After charges and preliminary information were offered, it was ordered that Joseph be held without bond until the time of his trial. At the arraignment, even though he had confessed to the killing and provided details of what had happened to the officers the previous day, Joseph would enter a plea of not guilty. Over the next year and beyond, Joseph would remain in jail awaiting trial. During this time, he applied for a court-appointed attorney. Filings showed that in the previous year to the incident, he and Emily had only made about $4,000 in verifiable income. He also stated on the form that beyond about $3,500 in the couple's bank account, he had on hand about $10,000 in cash. Forensic personnel in searching the camper van, however, reported they found some $20,000 in cash in the vehicle. In addition, Joseph listed the camper van, a 2016 Jeep, and a 2021 Ducati motorcycle in his possession, along with another unspecified motorcycle. Investigators would find that he had given both motorcycles to friends earlier to either hold on to or keep prior to the incident. Records would also show that he still roughly owed about $6,000 on the Ducati motorcycle. The camper and the cash on hand, being a big part of the evidence in the trial, left him with an inability to pay the full amount that would be considered normal for a trial of this magnitude. He would be allowed to use a public defender, funded at least in part with his own limited resources. Emily's family and friends were left to cope with the loss as best they could. The Ferlazzo's dog, Remington, had been found apparently, and then dropped off at one of Joseph's friends' houses before the incident occurred. The dog now lives with Emily's mother and stepfather, Adrian and David Bass. The Bass family, devastated by the loss of their daughter, were able to receive some counseling from a special social work group that operates as part of the Vermont State Police Major Crimes Unit. They thanked the group, but said that the loss might never be something they could get over. In December of 2022, Adrian and David would win a civil case against Joseph Ferlazzo for the death of Emily. The family would be awarded a judgment of $1.5 million. While there was no way that Joseph would be able to pay that amount of money, the Basses would say the case and the judgment were done to make sure that in no way Joseph would ever be able to profit off the death of their daughter. Should he sell his story, any proceeds would go to her family rather than him. In August of 2023, Joseph's attorney would request additional forensic testing on the firearm allegedly used in the murder as part of his defense. It can be assumed that after the reporting of those results, Joseph's murder trial should follow along not too long after. Until then, his plea of not guilty will have to stand until the evidence and his own confession can be brought before a judge and jury. On a side note, this is not the first time the Ferlazzo family has encountered murder. In October of 2009, Joseph's stepmother, Young-hee Lynn Ferlazzo, was found stabbed to death in her apartment. Joseph Ferlazzo Sr. had come home after a late-night grocery shopping trip and found her dead on the floor in their home in Upper Gwinnett Township in Pennsylvania. The father was questioned in the stabbing but was not considered a suspect. It is now considered a cold case by local police. Lynn Ferlazzo had been the manager of a massage parlor owned by her husband. The massage parlor had been raided sometime before, and a number of workers had been charged with prostitution, including the woman's niece. In the case of the younger Ferlazzo, we will have to wait to see if justice will be served in the death of Emily. If anything can be taken from this case, it is that domestic arguments and violence are serious issues. If you or someone you know is the victim of domestic violence, please seek help and do not allow yourself to become a victim of continued abuse or even worse.